Okay, hello. I'm Phil Croshaw, and welcome to yet another edition of Passions Live. And I'm delighted today to be welcoming back a guest, actually, through popular demand and notoriety. I'm delighted to be welcoming back Giles Clark to the show. I'll let Giles introduce himself, but some of you may have seen an initial interview I did a few months ago with Giles, and he's doing a new project, and we just had to get him on to talk about the new project. So a very warm welcome again to Passions, Giles. Tell us, for those people who don't know, tell us who you are and what your passion is.
Well, first of all, Phil, thank you so much for having me back. It's a real pleasure. I really, I enjoy doing these type of interviews all the time, but I immensely enjoyed our last one. So again, I'm grateful for you having me back. Who am I?
Thank you.
Well, I'm a passionate conservationist would be the best way to describe, what I do. I'm not a scientist. I started my career as a zookeeper, but very quick when I was a teenager, so many moons ago now. But I very quickly realized that for me, it wasn't about just looking after animals in captivity. Giving them the best quality of life we can is really important, and their welfare. But ultimately, it's about trying to help, support, and keep them in the wild. And so throughout the course of my, whether we want to call it a career or vocation, whatever it is, for the last 2.5 decades, whatever I've done with working with and looking after animals in captivity, I've tried to extrapolate that so it becomes about supporting conservation efforts. And over the last 8 or 9 years, some of our viewers might recognize my not so young face anymore from doing several series with the BBC. So we've got a strand called About the House that follows various journeys that I've been on initially, probably always with some form of baby and cute individual, and we follow their journey. But ultimately, it's about always talking about and telling the conservation challenges, if you like, that their wild counterparts face in the wild.
Fantastic. Okay, well, we'll come back to that. So I'm going to start off just by letting everybody know how this second interview really came about. And this is absolutely true. And Giles, I'm sure, will back me up on this. We're doing a panel show later in May, looking to try and get together world-renowned conservation people to discuss various different topics as part of the Passions journey. And I was fortunate enough to be able to message Giles and say, are you available on this date? And the exact message he came back with, and he will confirm this, was something to the equivalent of, I'm not quite sure because I might be walking with elephants in Zimbabwe then. And I did laugh, and I showed it to a few of my friends and what have you, because, people quite often come up with all sorts of reasons and excuses why they can't do things. Oh, sorry, I've got to go to my mother's for tea, or whatever it might be. But I can honestly say that's the first time that particular reason for not being around has ever come back. So obviously you're very well. You're very well known for your work with the big cats, and of course you work with the Big Cat Sanctuary, which you can talk about a little bit later if you like. And then of course you got into the bears as well. Yeah. And now all of a sudden not content with those particular animals and probably many others, we now are planning on, or you are off next week to walk with elephants in Zimbabwe. Talk to me about the project.
Well, it's not just walking, if you like. It's about helping a very good friend of mine move some elephants that she has. And I suppose in the same way as, like you touched on, big cats has always been, the most sort of natural link for me, because they're the animals that I have historically looked after in zoos and in sanctuaries. And then I moved on to bears, and that came about because I'm for many years was a very good friend with Matt Hunt, who's the CEO of Free the Bears, the organisation that is and still works in Southeast Asia, rescuing bears from the wildlife trade. Well, I've also got a very good friend in Zimbabwe called Roxy. And Roxy and her family run a sanctuary in the capital called Harare. And historically, she has taken on wildlife that has needed to be rescued. If it can be rehabilitated and returned and released to the wild, that's exactly what she does. Or if it can't, then she tries in much the same way as the sanctuaries that we were working with Free the Bears in Southeast Asia. If it can't, she tries and gives it a quality of life in captivity. And she's done this for many years. And then at the height of the poaching crisis in 2012, she was getting multiple requests about taking on baby elephants. But baby elephants are a complete new kettle of fish, so to speak, and the resources and the logistics, as well as the infrastructure that it takes, is on a whole new level. But that's exactly what she did. She started to take on elephants and very quickly grew. So they've rescued now, probably close to 30 elephants. Some have been slightly bigger, so they don't necessarily come to the nursery. They get moved, rescued from whatever the circumstances are, and they get moved out to a conservation concession property that they operate. And others, when they're tiny babies and they're very vulnerable, and either they've been abandoned because their mums and the herd have had to leave if they've been caught in a well, or their mothers have been killed either through human elephant conflict or through poaching, or whatever the circumstances. Roxy takes these tiny babies. She usually bundles them into a plane, as much as crazy as it sounds, into a caravan plane, bit bigger than a Cessna, but only just, and brings them to the nursery, gets them through that first, critical 6 months where it's touch and go every day, and starts to rehabilitate them. And they can only stay at the nursery for so long. There's only so much that can be done at the nursery. And so then after a number of years, so some individuals, if they're incredibly healthy, very confident, psychologically ready, they might just be 2. Others might be a bit older, sometimes between 3 and 4. But she then moves them out, ready for their next stage, to her, as I said, a place called Panda Masuri, which is a conservation lease concession that they run, which backs onto protected areas over near Victoria Falls, so right over the other side of the country. And I've been talking to, I try and help out when and where I can. Actually, reminds me, another very good point we must touch on. Don't let me forget to talk about dogs, because I've got a link with dogs and Zimbabwe as well that I really wanted to bring up. But what we're doing is next week we're getting ready to move half a dozen, maybe even 7 of these young elephants over to Panda Masuri, so they can start the next stage in their rehabilitation. Now, this isn't, none of this is quick. So some of these elephants she's already been looking after for 2 or 3 years at nursery. Once we get them out to the future release site, they will still need quite intensive care for the next 12 to 18 months before they really start to integrate back into the wild. But in terms of success, there's already a number of elephants that have done this journey before and are now starting to integrate and become wild elephants. They're accepted by the wild elephants in the area. They quite often will spend multiple nights out with the wild herds before they come back in to check with their human carers. So, it's something that I'm intensely excited about. Now, on the side of that, that's my something that, the aspect that I'm incredibly passionate about. But beyond that, the thing that really always excites me is having the ability to be able to tell and share and communicate the things that I do and the journeys that I go on, because ultimately that's such a crucial part. Raising awareness and helping educate is such a crucial part of what will be needed to ultimately save species, save the planet, and save ourselves. And so, as we quickly touched on, I've multiple times now filmed different series for the BBC. This time we're doing things a little bit different. So myself and a small team of people are going out to actually independently film and capture this operation, if you like. And then the idea is that we can come back, spend a few weeks in the edit, we put together something that, you know, really does it justice, really, you know, looks like it could, you know, ultimately sit on any of the networks or platforms. And on the back of that, we can then hopefully get commissioned a much bigger series, not just about Wild is Life, which is this organization and those individual elephants, although incredibly important to me, but it's about then trying to get a series about the bigger context of elephants in Africa, about the challenges that they face, about the conservation challenges. Shall I stop talking? Do you have another question, or I can keep going?
No, I'm very good at interrupting if I need to.
Okay.
No, it's absolutely fantastic. So what I was going to ask you actually, is it fair to say then that back in the day, perhaps, as it were, in the traditional sense, you would maybe go to a large company or a large production company, you know, whether it's Sky TV or National Geographic, and just say, we've got this idea. We want to go out to Zimbabwe. We want to do this with elephants. Is it fair to say then that do we live in an age now where the chances of getting that, as you say, commissioned or taken up is increased by the fact that you're saying, not we've got this idea, but we've actually been out there and we've got all this amazing footage and we'd like to make this available on, shall we call it, mainstream television? Does it create so it's a smoother ride into the potential of getting it picked up?
It does where it concerns me, I suppose, in that regard. Now, we're not quite sure exactly how the style, if you like, that we're going to try and well, we're going to capture it on multiple styles. So we can potentially have a observational documentary, or we could have a features doc, or just a more traditional natural history documentary series. So we're going to first of all try and capture it in as many ways as we possibly can. I'm not personally, and it always makes me feel a little bit sort of, I can feel my toes already starting to curl. I don't see myself as being a television presenter. That's not my skill, if you like. And there's definitely presenters out there that are much more polished and much better at it than what I am. What the interest that I've had from different networks is when I'm doing something that's genuine. So when I'm involved in something that I'm doing anyway, regardless of whether there's a television camera there or not, it's something that I'm passionate about. It's something that I can speak with experience and conviction and expertise. And so that this project definitely fits in with that, because I was going anyway. Roxy and I have been talking about it for years now, or months, and I have been helping them with various other projects, whether it's helping formulate and put them in touch with specialists about the milk formula, or the dog thing that I'm going to tell you about, or lots of other side projects. So that's always been, I suppose that ticks that box as far as I'm concerned. The industry in terms of television is a completely different place now. It's changing so rapidly. You know, like when I remember, you know, when there was 4 television channels or 3 television channels, and that was it. You know, and you had no other option. Now there's hundreds. Plus you've got, you know, streaming. Plus you've got online. So there's much greater choice. And I think partly because of that, it is definitely more challenging to get a commission and get a sign off. So so yeah, there's definitely some considerations there. I think for the reason that one of the reasons that and probably the main reason though that myself and my little team are doing it this way is that by us doing it, we ultimately are protecting and owning the IP on it, and that's important, not because we want to financially benefit off of the back of that, although we obviously do want to make sure that we get enough funding to be able to make an entire series. But the reason it's important is because by doing so, it will allow us to go out and generate much more and significant impact to support the cause and to support the organizations afterwards. And I've been incredibly fortunate, very privileged to do the programs that I've done, and on the back of that, every single one of them, I've seen the results of when it goes to air, the support that those programs then generate for the cause. So whether that was Tigers About the House, and we went out and saw the tiger protection conservation units that I was working with in Sumatra, and the level of support we got on the back of that program, whether it was the Big Cat Sanctuary and Big Cats About the House, or Free the Bears and Bears About the House. There's been really significant, really important help and support, financial and beyond financial, otherwise, members, etc., that have come on the back of it. And we want to do that with elephants, but on steroids. We want to make this one really, really, really big. And so we're getting there. The COVID restrictions have definitely thrown a bit of a spanner in the works. But I've worked really hard with the team. We've gone out. We've had some fantastic supporters come on board, and they know that they're supporting us as an independent production company. They know that they're supporting us and not necessarily paying for the elephants to be moved. And I'm confident, and I can put my hand on my heart and say that if we manage to get a series away, that £100,000 that it's cost, or just over what it's going to cost us to produce this first initial part, in 2 years' time, I'm hoping that will translate into £1 million worth of support for elephant conservation and elephant organisations. And I'm really, having seen what Bears has done, what Big Cats has done, I'm really confident that we can do that. So if anyone's listening and wants to get on board, we were doing really well until all of a sudden we were told that all of us are going to have to quarantine for 11 nights at some travel lodge or something at Heathrow on our return. So we've significantly eaten into the post-production budget. So if anybody wants to help us produce an elephant series, then definitely get in touch.
Right, that's fantastic. Well, I'll tell you what, on that basis then, what's the best way to get in touch with you, Giles? What's the best way to communicate with you if somebody wants to help or be involved on the periphery?
That's really kind. I should have thought of that before I just did an appeal, shouldn't I? The easiest way would be, I've got a website, gilesclarkwild.com, and on there it will say contact me. And I, follow, and it comes through to my email address. So Giles Clark Wild, and contact me page, and you can be in touch. So
great. Well, when we're done,
the dogs. I've got to tell you about the dogs.
Hang on, I'll come to the dogs in a minute. We've got to do this in an organised, professional order.
Okay, I'm glad. Well, you're the professional. Help
this isn't an elephant walk where anything could happen. Chaos.
That's a good
so what
word.
I'll do,
obviously,
I'm only kidding you. What I'll do is when we're done, I'll put a link actually underneath in the comments box, and then people will be able to link to the website you talked about. So I'll do that, which is fine.
Thank you.
Okay, right. All right, I'm going to let you now. taken completely out of order, but I don't care. You're going to talk to me now about the dogs. Tell me about the dogs, because it's obviously itching. You're itching to get this out about the
Well, I
dogs.
can't. It's so important. I can't forget. So, with one of my other hats on, I'm an ambassador for an organisation called Saving Animals. Again, run by another very good friend of mine, Daryl. Daryl is ex-military, but worked in the military with training dogs, and more importantly, just as importantly, training the handlers. His organisation now, Saving Animals, is a charity, and they source and supply and donate dogs for conservation roles. And that he's now got dogs that are effectively all over the world. And these dogs play several roles, depends on the type or breed of the dog, and depends on the needs of the organisation. So they might be tracking dogs, and obviously, tracking is important when you're trying to find people that are up to no good, whether it's a poacher or people that have been illegally logging or whatever the case may be. Dogs are incredibly efficient. Obviously, you've got an amazing nose, and are much better at tracking than any human being. So we've got dogs that are in the field assisting rangers by tracking. They might be search dogs, where Daryl can train them to pick up a particular contraband. So in much the same way as police dogs or customs dogs are trained to sniff out illegal drugs, etc., you can train dogs to sniff out weapons or ammo or illegal wildlife products. So we've got dogs that can also search, and then lastly, we've got dogs that can apprehend. So usually, if a dog's tracking, and then the rangers, come upon the person or people, and there's a situation where they're not going to go quietly or stop, we can send the dogs down to assist the rangers in apprehending. Again, in much the same way you see, police dogs and dogs for the military are trained. The ultimate goal or prize, if you like, is having dogs that can potentially do all three roles. And that's where Daryl will use like Belgian Malinois or Dutch herders. So they're the same sort of dogs that you'll see Navy SEALs or the SAS or the Secret Service use, and they're an incredible multi-role dog that can do all three. Now, the long and short of it is a little while ago, I put Daryl in touch with the Wildlife team, because out at Panda Masui, we've got rangers that are obviously helping to protect the elephants, protect the ecosystem, and work within the communities, etc. And we all decided almost immediately that a dog would be an absolute incredible asset. So Daryl's been fundraising. We've sourced a dog that's suitable, and he's, as I said, been fundraising, and he's about 75%, 70% there on getting enough funds to not only acquire the dog, train it, but also then be able to take the dog out at the end of the year and then train the handlers or train the rangers that will become the handlers. And again, I'm super excited. I've seen how effective these dogs are firsthand. I've spent a lot of time with them in Kenya and other places, as well as obviously up at Norfolk, helping Daryl when I can with doing a bit of training. So again, it's super exciting, and it shows you it's all coming together. I'm having my role, if you like, is helping with the network of committed, passionate, concerned people that I come across or I'm friends with, and tying them all up together and putting them in touch. So again, I think it will be it'd be absolutely incredible be able to be back out at the end of the year and see a dog on location helping the rangers do their thing. And
so how could people? How could people help out with that? Where would they? Is there a way of finding out more about that, or is it something I can link to in the bottom after the show?
I think the easiest way to keep it simple, if people are interested in dogs helping elephants, then again, just drop me an email in the contact me section, and then I can put them in touch with Daryl and the team, or whatever aspect that they're interested in supporting.
That's absolutely fantastic. It's interesting you said before, just picking up something you said a little while ago about, you don't feel you're polished, or you don't think you're in what you term as a professional presenter. I would argue that, and this perhaps comes about as a result of my day job in marketing and business development, is that, and I know it's a bit of a cliche word, but authenticity is more key now than ever. And I suspect that, as I've got to know you, I suspect that your authenticity and genuineness helps significantly in the way that you're seen and perceived and enjoyed in those shows, versus somebody who's polished and professional, which arguably doesn't cut through so much anymore.
I think you've probably hit the nail on the head, and we've had this discussion. I've had this discussion with my little team that I work with for most of these projects, and I try, again, it always feels uncomfortable talking about yourself, right? And it feels a bit weird, and I don't tend to think of it in those terms, because I don't have to. Using one of those words, I genuinely don't have to try hard or think about being passionate or caring about those individual animals or those species or that issue, because it's been my life, ever since my earliest memories of starting my life at Paradise Wildlife Park all those years ago has been about those things. And so I don't think of it in those terms. I just sort of get on and do it, and I will get on and do anything that I feel is absolutely necessary, whether that's picking up a broom and a shovel, or a wheelbarrow full of concrete, or the most terrifying things I do, stick me in with an animal any day of the week in comparison. But this is brilliant. I love having a chat with you, and hopefully people watching are getting something out of it. But I've done a few events where I've had to stand up on stage in front of thousands of people, and knees are knocking, my mouth is dry, and then all of a sudden I think, I don't even know what I'm going to talk about here, and somehow I have to come up with something on the hoof. So, but I do it because I want it to make a difference. I want to help make a difference. I want to help drive, support. And you think, well, why is that important? There's so many problems, and again, we might have touched on it last time, but I can't stress enough, that conservation is not a luxury. It doesn't matter who you are, where you are in the world, what country you live in. Protecting our natural world is now more critical than ever before. And you could say, well, what's 6 individual baby elephants? What does that matter? That's not going to make any difference. But to me, it does. And Wild is Life have this tagline, and I love it, and I've used it all the time now. It's one by one, and it really is one by one. First of all, doesn't matter whether the species is critically endangered, vulnerable, or not even threatened, but it's ultimately made up of individuals. Now, if you think about elephants, they're one of the most sentient beings on the planet. They are immensely intelligent. They're so like humans, it's not funny really for me. They've got these massive brains. They're long-lived. It's very, very much about family groups and community. They're, as I said, I can't stress how immensely intelligent they are. They show empathy towards one another. They recognize themselves. They recognize a dead member of their own species, even when it's in just bones. So there's so much about elephants, and I think that's why I'm so passionate about this project. But beyond that, we talk about the crisis that the planet's facing, and we're all still in the midst of, some countries very much in the midst of going through a pandemic that was caused by the way in which we humans treat the natural world. forget all this pish about, oh, it was a biological weapon that escaped and all the rest of it, because we know that COVID it has ultimately come from another species and crossed over species and into humans. And where that happens is these wildlife markets, these markets. And people say, oh, but everywhere's got wet markets. I'm not talking about a Billingsgate fish market. If you've ever been to a wet market or a wildlife market in Asia, for example, it's a very, very, very different kettle of fish, where you've got dozens, sometimes hundreds of different species that are being captured. Some of them, or lots of them, are being captured out of the wild. They're still alive. They're stressed out to the max. They're about to die themselves, usually because of, not being treated and having the right food and conditions and water. They're piled on top of each other in terms of cages. And that's exactly how it's off topic. COVID-19 has crossed over because, we know that SARS came from wildlife. We know that Ebola came from wildlife. Ultimately, HIV started in wildlife as well as a multitude of other diseases. And so biodiversity is important to every single person on this planet, but it also links into, and probably, elephants could be one of the species that is actually, a bigger flagship for this point than any other. It links into climate change now, and it's fantastic that there's so much awareness about climate change now, and we're hearing it at the moment, regularly in the media, which is absolutely fantastic. But elephants play such a pivotal role in climate change in the habitats where you find them. And
can I just ask you something there, Giles? Actually, an interesting observation that I've got. Well, it might not be that interesting, but something that I'm interested in is, you've been in this world for many years now, decades, arguably. We've gone through, going through and just virtually on the other side of where we are if we're in the UK, the pandemic. What's your feel as in terms of the understanding and seriousness by which people take the climate change and conservation agenda, for want of a better word? Are people more behind it now? Are people more aware of it now? Are people up for doing something about it more now? Or has it stayed relatively level over those years?
I think in general, and not just because of the pandemic, I think there's a much greater awareness, and I'd like to think, especially because of the younger generations, that there is more drive and more want to do something about it. We cannot continue on this path as business as normal or business as usual. And so I'm optimistic, and I'm really hopeful that that it's not, that we're not past the point of no return, and that we can turn this around. What I can categorically say, though, like most other people, is it doesn't need an expert to work out that we don't have a lot of time left. Now, what's a lot of time? What's in the blink of an eye? If you think, I saw an analogy of how old the planet is, in terms of, and if we compared it to a 46-year-old man or something, so we know it's, as a solid mass, it's been around for 4.6 billion years, and so if we compared it to a 46-year-old man, like the Industrial Revolution started 2 seconds ago or something, or 1 second ago. And so, and you think the Industrial Revolution is 4 generations in our time. And if you think we've destroyed over 50% of the world's forest in that last 1 second, and in many places it's now speeding up. It's not slowing down. And so, are we really learning? Are we really changing? I think every day there's many battles that are being won for the environment. Do I think we're yet winning the war? most definitely not. And we don't have a lot of time. Like our generation, you and I might continue as life as we know it, but will our children? You could argue, but maybe not, but certainly not what we're currently doing. Will our grandchildren or our great grandchildren? And are we that selfish that we know what we are doing is going to have consequences for future generations? Are we that selfish, and yet we choose to, because it's slightly inconvenient, or it's going to cost us something, that we're not going to make a change? Because we have the luxury at the moment of having the ability to make choices, but business as usual means that we're taking that ability to have choices away from future generations, and that's not something that I'm comfortable with, or would want to just sit back and say I can't do anything about. So I'm trying to do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely right, and good on you for doing that, 100%. I sometimes wonder, and I'm interested to get your views on this, but I sometimes wonder to what degree, and I've said this before on other shows, but to what degree people kind of almost perceive that they're in a movie. The disaster movies, we watch the movie, there's the huge tidal wave that wipes out New York or wherever else, and then there's a huge freeze that wipes out another 3 or 4 countries at the same time, and then at the end of the movie we go, oh, that was interesting, oh, that's quite scary, that. Anyway, what we're having for tea.
Yeah.
Do you think is there an element of that going on, that we kind of almost think it's a bit like a movie and it'll be all over in a few years and everything will be back to normal?
Oh, I don't know. We're getting away from animals a bit, aren't we? We're talking about human psychology, and that's certainly not my area of expertise. I think, though, for me, and I've said this, a few times in the last 18 months. Again, let's think of two viruses when we're talking about the pandemic being caused by the wildlife trade. So you've got coronavirus that we're all living through at the moment, and then we've heard of Ebola, but it really didn't affect anyone in the West. It was African nations that really that had the problem with it. Now, if you imagine coronavirus, although absolutely horrid, and my heart goes out to families that have lost loved ones, really, in the scheme of things, coronavirus, in terms of numbers and the percentage of people that it has either killed or severely affected long term, is relatively low in terms of the population of either the country or the planet. And that's because 99% of people that get it, feel unwell for a few days and then recover and carry on with their life. But can you imagine if we had some sort of scenario where you had a virus that was as contagious as COVID-19, but had the consequences and was as deadly as Ebola? Because then people would really see the impact, and would really, every single person would feel the effects, because if you got it, the chances are you were going to die, and it's not a quick or nice death. Ebola, it's absolutely horrendous, and so everyone's been affected, and everyone's been aware of the impact. But again, perfectly healthy young families, the consequence for them was inconvenience and some of those inconveniences, I'm not brushing them, I'm not downplaying them. Some of those inconveniences were still terrible. People have lost their livelihoods and have lost their jobs, etc. And I think of the children's education that's been affected as well. But beyond that, in 2 years' time, if we carry on in this same trajectory, where, okay, it might mean that everyone has to have an annual booster in terms of a vaccination in much the same way as vulnerable people do now for flu. In 2 years' time, if that's COVID is almost like a distant memory, do I think, the majority of people have gone, oh, do you remember that time and this happened and that was caused by the way in which we treated the natural world, so we must change? I'm not confident at the moment that we've hit that sort of light bulb moment as a species or as society. I think younger generations are starting to get that way now in terms of the impact of climate change, but climate change and biodiversity loss, are equally as important as the threat that they place on us. Like, there's no point having a perfect climate if we don't have the diversity of the natural world, because it will impact us in other ways. So selfishly, for me, it goes far beyond, when you hear people say, oh, it's really important that we save the tiger because so our future generations can have the opportunity to know that it lives in the forest or can see it, or like, really, how many people are gonna make the effort to go out and see a tiger in the wild? The reason the tiger is important in the wild is it helps keep the balance of nature and those ecosystems. And those ecosystems are important for tens of millions of people directly, locally, people that live in and around the forest or downriver from the watersheds that the forest provides. But those forests in turn play an equally important part in the global ecosystem. And as I mentioned before, it doesn't matter where you live, you still want to be breathing oxygen, and I know that oxygen doesn't just come from trees, it comes from our ocean. But what I'm trying to demonstrate is it's also interconnected, and we're think of it as a spider's web. Everything is equally tensioned on each other. And at the moment, we're pulling those webs, we're cutting those strands. And at what point is it going to be the critical strand and the whole thing goes skew with and starts to collapse? We just don't have time. We need to be doing everything we possibly can now. It needs to be our number one priority. Equally, biodiversity loss and climate change go hand in hand, and we need to be making a difference. So on that note, that brings me to a point that I was reading for my research last week. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, did an assessment recently, last year, and we hear about elephants. And when you hear people say, or countries say, oh, we've got too many elephants, and yes, there are too many elephants in their areas, in that habitat, than can be possibly supported in terms of the resources. But that's not because you've got too many elephants. That's because they've got too little wild landscapes left and too little environment left to support those type of numbers. So it's not that you've got too many elephants, it's that you don't have enough natural habitat left. But beyond that, going back to what I was saying, the IMF said, well, whether it's a trophy hunter or whether it's a poacher, but the net worth of killing an elephant for those reasons is about average of $40,000. And that's it. You get one shot at that, because when it's dead, it's gone. That individual's gone. The net worth over the course of an elephant's lifetime, in terms of the ecological services that it provides in helping maintain the habitat that sequesters carbon, as well as tourism and the other benefits that elephants bring, one individual elephant is on average worth over $1.5 million. So even the sheer economics of protecting our elephants, 40,000 one-off, or over the course of its ongoing 70 odd years in the wild, ongoing life, it's going to be worth over $1 million, nearly 1.5 million. You don't need to be an accountant or an economist to work out, well, actually, I know which one pays off better in the long run. And so
even the financial side of it stacks up as well.
Yeah,
I think.
But how do we put a price? As terrible as it sounds, how do we put a price on a life? How do we put a price on an elephant's life? Anybody that's lost someone over this horrendous 18 months that we've lived through, you know, you wouldn't put a price on a person, and I don't think we should be doing the same for, you know, any species, but especially elephants. And that's really, as difficult as that sounds, you know, I think in today's society, there's other ways, you know, there's better mechanisms, and there's other ways. And, you know, again, the thing that does give me hope, and the one thing that's probably come out of this pandemic, is it shows you that, you know, when we really want to achieve something, when we really feel that we either have to, or we put the weight of governments and corporations and individuals behind something, we can do it. You know, look how many horrible, probably preventable diseases are out there, but they're on a much lower scale and have far less impact. And so therefore, we haven't suddenly in the 8 months developed a vaccination for them, but we have for something that, you know, like COVID-19, that's having terrible consequences. And so, you know, do I think we can overcome our environmental challenges? Yes, but there has to be the motivation to do it.
Yeah, I think, I've just hit the nail on the head. And I find it interesting, and it's a slight aside, but I have a very good friend, Dr. Dorian Dugmore, who's a world-renowned cardiologist, and obviously for the heart and such like. And I've done speeches in conferences with him as my co-speaker. I talk about digital and growing businesses and all that, and he talks about the importance of looking after yourself in order to grow your business and all the rest of it. And he said to me a few times that what he sees a lot is that there's a lot of preaching comes out about look after your heart, look after your health. He said, and the significant amount of it falls on deaf ears. It's like, yeah, whatever. He said, and what always drives the change is what he says. There's an event, he calls it, which is basically a stroke or a heart attack, something real. And it's only when there's an event that impacts them personally or impacts their family, because, you know, the wife or the husband thinks, oh my God, I nearly lost my wife, or my God, I nearly lost my husband. And suddenly they take it seriously. It's real in a way. And what I said earlier, it's real and not a movie. Yeah. So do you think there's an element of that as well, where it's kind of, well, it's happening in the background. Yeah, okay, fair enough. But how serious do you take it until, and this is the danger, I think, one of the dangers, how serious do you take it until there's actually is a tsunami that takes half of the west coast of the UK out?
I know, and that's the frightening thing. I would agree 100%. You know, how can we change that? It's interesting in that a very, very good friend of mine and a very respected conservationist, we were talking about, you know, how do we change people's minds? How do we have an impact? And they turned around and said, we've got a real struggle on our hands. We've been telling people for 40 years that smoking cigarettes directly kills you. It kills you. If you're doing it in front of your children in closed rooms and cars, and it's probably going to kill them too, or have a significant impact. And yet it's taken 40, 50 years of that messaging, and we still have people smoking, and we still have people taking it up. And so, you know, that's where the challenge is. So people are aware of that information, but they're still willing to take the risk because, you know, God, everyone's got an Aunt Betty that got to 95 and smoked a packet a day, and, you know, with her 3 gallons of gin, and she got to 95. So if she did, I must be fine. But we know it doesn't work that way. It's always going to be an anomaly, but that's what we hang on to. And so that's the challenge. You know, that really is the challenge.
I must admit, one of the things that did make me stop and think was some of these pictures of beautiful Caribbean or Pacific Island sandy beaches just strewn with plastic. And having been fortunate enough to been to some of these places, and a number of them which I went to years ago when there wasn't the same level of problem, that certainly made me stop and think, oh my God, you know, that beach I was on virtually is now looking like that, which frankly it just looks disgusting. And I think you made the point early on in the conversation about the importance of education, and frankly, maybe it's, just keep banging the drum in a sense, and just keep. I suppose you have to, because the truth is that unless people like you and my co-founder of Passion, Spencer Phillips, and the likes of Ian Redmond and Gillian Miller and all these people we've been fortunate enough to interview on this channel, without you guys, shall we say, just keep banging the drum and keep reminding us of the seriousness of this, then we've not got a prayer and hell.
Yeah, I agree, and there are wins. There are wins every day. There are wins, and we talk about plastic and the ocean, and an organisation, again, one that I'm very passionate about, Fauna and Flora International. I'm a vice president of FFI, along with many well-known people and conservationists, including our good friend Sir David, and our patron is Prince William. But beyond that, last year, they managed with others as a consortium, through pressure, to now to put into legislation to stop using microplastics in makeups and shampoos and all the rest of it, which ultimately, you wash straight down the drain and ends up in our ocean. But going on to what you were saying, and that's the key. Yes, it is about education, and every individual, individual is part of that and matters. But if you think of the millions and millions and millions of tons of plastic that are in our ocean, and we've all seen those pictures, and again, I've been incredibly lucky, been on some very remote beaches, and there's still, fridge freezers that have washed up, and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of plastic. But 70% of discarded plastic in our ocean is fishing equipment. 70%. So whilst at the same time, it's absolutely, it's vital that we stop, the plastic cotton bud or the plastic toothbrush holder or what have you, that, God knows how these things end up in the ocean, but that stuff is vital. But what we really need is changes in legislation when it comes to the fishing industry, because if they're not accountable for the millions of tons of nets and buoys and crab pots and all the rest of it, if they're not accountable, then we're scratching the surface. And that comes down to governments, and that comes down to legislation, and ultimately, they do bend to peer pressure and what the constituents want and what the people want. But as we know, it takes a concerted effort over a long period of time to be heard.
I find that quite surprising. Actually, that's quite shocking, because you'd think that the people who are in the fishing industry, you think they'd have a massive respect for the sea that's providing their livelihoods, and if they're bunging stuff over the side without a care, that's horrific.
Well, you think so, wouldn't you? But it doesn't work that way, because people think, it's so vast, they just, we just move on. That makes no difference. But we know it does, like the bycatch, the bycatch issue, and you see, complete waste. It's, it's one thing to think we're fishing to supply the protein needs of people, which again, there's some people that are completely reliant on protein from the oceans, and I'm not ever suggesting that we stop sustainably harvesting that resource, but there's certain elements to it where the bycatch is phenomenal. They're catching mammals and sharks and whales and seals and all sorts of, and then it dies and they just throw it over because it wasn't the particular species that they were after at that particular time. So
Giles, I know
it's a vast issue.
It is. I wish if only we could fix it in an hour on a Friday afternoon.
On a Friday afternoon, yeah.
Yeah, Friday afternoon. Listen, we'll call it a day, because I know you've got other things to do. So, look, as always, just as pleasurable as it was the first time when we chatted, just as pleasurable the second time we've chatted. Obviously, wish you all the best. It's a cliche now, but stay safe in Zimbabwe. Don't get trampled by an elephant. But if
I'm
you
going
do
to try
get
and avoid
trampled,
that. Yeah.
yeah, try and avoid it. But if you do get trampled by an elephant, make sure that the cameras are rolling, because then it can go out on YouTube and you'll make millions of pounds. So there's always a slight upside, mate, from those disasters.
Well, thank you. I'm going to bear that in mind. Yeah, you're not the only one. My wife was saying to me yesterday, please don't get stomped. Please don't get stomped. And I said, well, I have no intention. I'm not going out to look for trouble. Believe me. So.
Well, that's good though, because she obviously still cares. That's a good thing.
That's right. It's exactly. That was right after. Don't forget, you've got to make sure your life insurance is up to date.
Exactly. Right, okay then, mate. Fantastic. Love that, and absolutely fabulous. And we will be doing a panel show when you get back at some point. I know we'll get everybody together and we'll really get into this topic and discuss and debate. And I think one of the drivers for me in terms of that passions panel is to really get into the dirt, as I sometimes call it, and try and debate and figure out what the hell can be done to really take that depth of communication to another level, rather than the meh, which tends to be the case, I think, sometimes with people around it. All the very best in Zimbabwe. I'm sure I'll be catching you again very soon. And thanks for joining me today on Passions Live. And I will catch you when you get back from your trip.
Brilliant. Thank you so much once again, Phil.
You're very welcome. Thanks for your time, Giles.
Cheers.
All the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.